So we have 4 speakers already talked about these issues. Now I'd like to open the floor. What I'm going to do is actually to let you to ask questions and comments, and then we come back to have concluding remarks. So if you have any questions and comments, get ready. Before that, okay, 1, 2, 3, it's coming, right?
This is Shirley Xu, as addressed to the panelists, particularly Professor Liu. I'm a part of East Asian Institute, so I'm very proud of this moment. I have to shoot for a flight. I want to mention about, I'm in investment banking, and many people here probably knows a lot of the junior staff that we have throughout all the big houses, Morgan Stanley, Goldman. I don't know about Goldman, but I know about Morgan Stanley. So a lot of them are mainland Chinese educated here, Hong Kong U or Chinese U on the analyst or social level. And if you calculate the numbers in next 10 years, the lawyers, accountants are also moving in that space. In the financial world, that is changing phenomenally. Financial service industry. And this pattern is going to change from the professional staff requirements because the language skill, the technical skills they have. Going forward, I really think in 20 years down the road, Hong Kong, China, it's one entity. Yes, we're looking for the moral values that we're trying to create. In fact, Hong Kong is pretty corrupted in that sense, the moral values. But we're moving. It's a journey for all of us. And I would like to hear some of the panelists, your thoughts. And Frank, my mother and I love your mother's book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Edith, please. I will collect all the questions, comments.
I see. The question is actually quite related to Shirley's. And first of all, I really want to thank the Institute for organizing this symposium. I came half-heartedly thinking that I might fall asleep, but actually my thinking process swung from one side of the pendulum to the other side throughout this afternoon, and until we got to Professor Liu's. Now, I am very glad to hear that you think that mainlandization hopefully will not be as fast as Hong Kongization. I worry about, not for myself, because I won't be employable then, and I might hopefully be in heaven, but I worry about the next generation. I see a lot of very, very bright PRC Chinese in China and in Hong Kong. Now, with Gage talking about corporate governance, and Ron Cully as well, and Professor Chan, Professor Cheung, as well as Frank, talking about how Hong Kong was a refuge. My parents came to Hong Kong in 1949. I was born here. But actually, I don't feel the kind of pressure or fear about China. Over the last 20 years, my views of China have changed. I am beginning to learn more about China, and obviously China would learn more about Hong Kong during these few years. Now, 50 years, 50年不变, I thought that's a very, very smart proposal of Deng Xiaoping. In 50 years' time, why is Hong Kong not to be changed for these 50 years? Because we would be slowly moving towards being mainlandized, and obviously the people in China would also become more and more Hong Kongized. I just thought a place is made up of people that are in the place. Now, how many PRC Chinese are going to be in Hong Kong in 2047? And how many of the original Hong Kongers are still going to be here? I'm glad that Professor Lee talked about Hong Kong being an example. But as we get, hopefully not taken over by mainland Chinese philosophy, thinking, or behavior, I'm just hopeful that we are not being overturned. And I like to hear the non-PRs or non-outside of Hong Kong meaning the other three panelists' views, and also Geng Xiao yours, because you are an outsider.
Thank you. We have a question in the back.
Hi, Scott Harold from the RAND Corporation. Xiao Geng, it's good to see you again after a few years from Brookings. Today we had several descriptions of Hong Kong's satellite, pressure release valve, window on the world, but I want to pick up on one that I think might have been Frank, I don't know, a teenager, maybe that was Fernando, a teenager and a base for subversion against the mainland. And I want to ask you, the whole panel, a question centered around this. If we were to close our eyes and imagine we might be in Taipei or Singapore holding this conference, we could also think about those terms being used, especially given the events of the last couple of weeks in Singapore, where Singaporean democracy is maturing very quickly. People are talking about Singapore growing up. Singapore has often been talked about as a model for China, an authoritarian, one-party dominant political entity with a fairly open economic system. And clearly, many times, people have also hoped that Taiwan could exert some kind of an influence back on the mainland. But particularly in light of today's conference, which is called Hong Kong's Future in a Changing Asia, and yet most of the panel's comments have been about Hong Kong and China, I'm just wondering if the panelists could reflect on how Hong Kong's future might look in the rest of Asia, especially in light of what's happening in Singapore and Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, last question. Any last questions? We don't have much time. Okay. Good.
Yes, Gregory Lee. I'm Dean of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences at City University. So my concern actually is with the implications of what the panelists have said, especially the local panelists, for the future of press and academic freedom, both in Hong Kong and in mainland China.
Very good. Okay, so we actually have 1 minute, for each of the panelists, and reserve maybe 1 or 2 minutes for myself. I will actually use this first. I actually, before I left China, I lived in China for 21 years, and then spent 8 years in the United States, 15 years in Hong Kong, and now 4 years in Beijing. So Hong Kong actually is my second home. I really feel very strong about Hong Kong. And I think really you can think about the Qing dynasty if does not rent Hong Kong for Kowloon for another 99 years. There will be no Hong Kong and Hong Kong's impact on China. And the same thing applies, Chairman Mao, 1949, took back Hong Kong, and Deng Xiaoping, 84, right? And now I think the new generation is facing with the same question, whether to keep Hong Kong different or not. I actually see there's a tremendous option value, value of diversity, value that Hong Kong is different from China, for China and for Hong Kong. But my question is that we in Hong Kong, people in Hong Kong, I'm actually Hong Kong resident, Hong Kong passport holders, I'm Hong Kong people, I think, right? So we really need to think about more constructively, positively about the value of Hong Kong. The key is really to think about that democracy, freedom, press freedom, all these are very, very good. But how Hong Kong can handle this by focusing on its problems. For example, democracy, there's problems. Democracy means people vote, but people who are not yet born cannot vote. People die cannot vote. People who are not Hong Kong passport holder cannot vote. But so which means that basically democracy is an interest group, within a defined boundary, right? But the question is, the role of Hong Kong is actually beyond the local community. So I actually think that, to put my personal view, the Hong Kong people, including myself, should aspire to even higher value, which is really to bridge, China and the rest of the world, because China is big, it's important. The way China is moving will affect not just the people in Hong Kong, but the entire, 1/5 of the mankind and also the whole world, right? So in that sense, the keeping Hong Kong people aspiring to something beyond the local issues like building the bridge, all these issues, and high speed rail, I think is really important from my own personal perspective. So I will stop here and then give each panelist 1 minute. Sorry about that. Maybe starting from Xiaobo, reverse order.
All right. Again, she left, but this is about how, whether but it is, the question is related. So basically the question is, with this large number of mainlanders now, young people coming into the Hong Kong society, would that actually not just as visitors but actually work here and so on, becoming much more of a part of the Hong Kong society? So would that eventually, if I get a question, would that overwhelm the Hong Kong values? So basically, by a sheer number, they could basically, Chinization or mainlandization of Hong Kong. I'm not so sure, because I think, Fernando, you used the term imposed. I was thinking about, you can impose a system, an institution, democracy, universal suffrage, or whatever, 2011 or 2017 and so on. But culture is hard to, value system hard to impose. I think Frank alluded to that. You try to educate nationalism, but there is also, culture is a long change thing. Mao tried to impose culture change, it failed. So culture, granted, it has derived from, from political side point, it derived from institutions. But Hong Kong's value system, it's hard just to have thousands Chinese mainlanders here working in society, somehow impose that onto Hong Kong society. I'm more hopeful and more, I believe I get more optimistic about the strength of the soft power of this cultural value system that Hong Kong has. And I think one would argue that with the mainlanders working here, and they would pick up this, they would have become part of the Hong Kong society rather than supersede it, rather than changing it. So I'm more. Just take ourselves. I'm a mainland. I was born in mainland, but then I also educated as a kid in the United States. So have I been kind of Americanized? To some extent, yes. I went to China. I always tell my, I went back to the United States this last year teaching, and people keep asking, what do you think, why, do you like Beijing? Do you like living and working in Beijing? I said, of all things, I like it. It's dynamic society. It's a very well, it's everything. It's very exciting, and people, but I think one thing I don't like, you know what it is? It's certainly, it's just everything you have spent a lot of time on, how to deal with people, just like whining and dining, this kind of, I'm not used to that, a culture what was this lack of it, or lack of sort of rule of law, the kind of predictability and that sort of thing. Yes, so people can change. So I'm more hopeful than that.
Okay, good.
Question.
To respond briefly to what Scott said earlier, I think that what happened in Singapore is very significant. You know that China has been looking around the world for a long time to look at a model where that it can emulate, where it can say that it's democratic, it has elections, but it just happens to win every election. And that was true in Singapore. I guess it's still true, but it may no longer be true for much longer. And China was interested in Japan because the LDP, again, was winning every election, even though they're a democracy and they hold elections. And they looked at Taiwan, the KMT, won every election. But one by one, all these old societies have now changed. So that I don't think there is any country left that China can look to and think, we can emulate this model and we can say we're a democracy, we have elections. It just happens that we win every time. So, but I think that Taiwan is still important where Hong Kong is concerned, because, one country, two systems was originally devised with Taiwan in mind, and even though Taiwan shows no interest, it's still helpful for Hong Kong to have Taiwan there. And for China to recognize that if it does something to Hong Kong, it will have an impact in Taiwan.
Fernando.
Okay, I certainly agree to Frank's demonstration effect of Hong Kong. That notion is important to us. But coming back to the question about Hong Kong's role in the changing Asia, especially the gentleman alluded to the examples in Taipei and Singapore, and also the earlier questions about whether there's really a need to worry which process is taking place faster than the other, the mainlandization or the Hong Kongization. I'm a pessimist, I must admit. I think the world changes based on ideas. We certainly have developed to an extent that we have a lot of materials, wealth, and so forth. But with different ideas, different systems, things operate in different ways. I mean, after all, we have to stick to certain ground rules. And with things that are happening in mainland these days, I really see a lot of things that shouldn't be happening. Incidents like Ai Weiwei, Liu Xiaobo, and Zhao Lianhai, that they are being detained and so forth. I'm just afraid that without strong enough of a resistance or alarm, that it is easy for Hong Kong to be overwhelmed by the tremendous economic, political, and social power of China. I mean, we are no match for China in terms of numbers, in terms of volume, in terms of power. And at this moment, if we cannot emphasize enough of the uniqueness of Hong Kong and the perhaps demonstration effect of Hong Kong, and especially given the last 14 years, how Cheung and Geng failed in terms of really making themselves answerable to the Hong Kong people. I really worry that we could be subsumed by the mainland value system very quickly, and that in no time Hong Kong would be rendered as a second-class city in China, and that the system will no longer exist. I mean, the two systems will no longer exist, regardless of the examples in Taipei or Taiwan or Singapore. So I think it is an important point that people in Hong Kong, and especially in Asia and even around the world, that we need to preserve what it is in Hong Kong.
Thank you. Professor Ching?
I think what we can hope for is the slowing down of mainlandization at best. I think in order to overtake mainlandization is rather difficult. I think size matters over here. I'm talking about the Earth versus a satellite, the electron, versus the nucleus. So there is, as Fernando said, there is no match when you come to that point. What you can do is to increase your speed, be very vibrant, to go ahead before the Earth does. So time is not on the side of Hong Kong, I think, But when you talk about the development of the elite in China, yes, as far as certain elites are concerned, they can make rapid progress. They can compete on equal paths with outsiders from Hong Kong or from the rest of the world. They're very competitive. They share the same culture, very professional. But once these people return to China or working in the context of China, I think their professionalism would have to be compromised to some extent. Whether we like it or not, that has been the case. So there is still some edge in the case of Hong Kong. But when you come to the number of people, I don't think that we should have pitched too much hope in matching up the quantity in China. And then we also talk about the importance of reference societies. I mentioned about Hong Kong as a reference society to China. Yes, it's still so. What about Taiwan? What about Singapore? What about Egypt? All this, are reference society to mainland China too, but in different ways. Now, when we look at it, we tend to think that all these societies would pose structural countervailing force on China. But to the CCP, they may read it in different ways. They can learn something, from the Jasmine Revolution. So they will nip the butt, nip something at the butt. That is to say, they will stop things from spreading. The CCP is a fast learner. They learn very fast. Right after 1989, they would require all the freshmen to go through some kind of military training so that, the torch will not be passed from one generation to the rest. So the reference society, for Taiwan, I tend to read it both ways. One as a countervailing force in order to preserve the freedom that we have, autonomy that we have in Hong Kong. But at the same time, what about another scenario? What about if there is a civil war? Now, once a civil war break out between Taiwan and mainland China, I think the environment in Hong Kong would be drastically changed. We will be subject to one country, one rule instead of two systems. And then once that kind of things change, the parameters, for Hong Kong's development would be transformed. Now, of course, this is one of the scenarios, but we don't know. Well, we should look out for that kind of possibility too, because in the past, many people predict about the future China, and they always prove to be wrong. One last remark on the question on academic freedom. I think China at this point is facing a basic challenge, that is academic honesty. Now, plagiarism is prevails in China. Very common, my works and some of my colleagues' works are copied, without paying any tribute to us, So this is very basic. We are talking about university, very famous university, Fudan, Beijing, Beida, all this, Harvards and MITs of China, they are subject to this kind of, basic academic dishonesty. So when you talk about academic freedom, I think there is a higher order, Of course, China needs that, and China wants to be creative, and then, whether you have academic freedom is conducive, to creativity. So in that regard, I think there's a structural pressure on China to open up academically. But before we get to that stage, basic academic honesty is needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, we will end this section now, but we are going to have closing remarks by Professor Cohen. Let's thank our panelists and also our participants. Thank you very much.